Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the BIOMES seminar. My name is Shoko Yamada. I'm a third-year doctoral student here at YSE and the Anthropology Department, and I'm a member of the BIOMES organizing committee. BIOMES stands for Bridging Issues and Optimizing Methods in Environmental Science. It's our school's flagship seminar series hosted by the Dean's Office and facilitated by a committee of students and staff. Our goal is to bring cutting-edge research and new ideas to the YSE community. Before we introduce today's speaker, I wanted to talk a little bit about today's format. So after the talk, we will have a chance. You will have a chance to ask your questions during a short Q&A session. If you are attending in person, you can raise your hand and walk up to one of the mics up front to ask your question. If you are attending on Zoom, you can submit your questions at any time to the Q&A box on the bottom of your Zoom screen, or use your raise hand function on Zoom, and you'll be given speaking privileges to ask your questions live. So with that, I'll now pass the floor to Christian Espinosa-Schatz, who is a PhD student here at YSE and the Anthropology Department, and he'll be introducing today's speaker for us.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be joining virtually. So yes, I have the pleasure of introducing today's speaker, which I will keep as short as possible so that we can have some time for Q&A at the end. So yes, without further ado, today's speaker is Professor Michael Cepek. Dr. Cepek is Professor of Anthropology at the University of Texas at San Antonio. Dr. Cepek has worked with the Kofan people of the Ecuadorian Amazon for over 2 decades on issues of environmental change, indigenous politics, and Kofan phenomenology. From describing the Kofan's complex and troubled relationship with the global petroleum industry to the ways Kofan shamans navigate violence, invasion, and dispossession, Professor Cepek's work illustrates the potential of the ethnographic method for understanding the full complexity of environmental and social relations. So while there's much more that could be said of Professor Cepek's engaged ethnographies, I will let today's presentation speak for itself. So please join me in welcoming Professor Michael Cepek as he gives a multimedia presentation titled Indigenous Colonization, Territorial Dispossession, Shamanic Violence, and Anthropological Ethics in Amazonian Ecuador.
Pasayate.
Pasaya que YSE que BIOMES andega que canse que haka si zanda apa zaka que no gigi
Takande.
zaka
Nyame.
wow that's hatu ita hatu yo mes que pasaya
Abu Hatsengi.
ainda que tá cucuia paquesu sexta que aí o nia meio
Meio.
zama nya tu que cria me tu que cria me tu que cria que isso que já é maquia conha ufa coscui que o passe um gosto manisane ga haka que a seta já bigi
Takande.
zaka ainda tu va kokama ande vakito o carrinho beta tsuhin zama tsu va tsu tuni kan se fachu aine que tsu ya é makui zama da ufa ko é fa zaka ba tsu vakito ande ha so sikni ga ande ya ka que zapa que sta haji
Takande da.
zaka tsu da hanyu da tsu boge ta yu akang nyam bi ya ha tsu boge so sikni ga tsu ande ya
Takande.
zaka na
Yeah.
ainda tu foi senhora vai na que ni canse tu tá aqui na tu se ni canse vai tu singue que ni canse vai sa ta tu sombo pa ku tu sombo de se da tu sa pa ku no maninha fa ebe tu ta ku que se pa que sa ku sa chimbiraco zanga tu ha pa ha akani ha za ai kukuya ai bonga ha kani da za pu dise za za dise ai bonga nonge yesi ati pat na enga anga za ma fiti
Nyame.
za ka tsunsi ati pat re di kwatan ju kya ga de paket sa da nya wen yu we ha yu we ti ku i pai za kukuya ma ka ba ya ka has
Nyame.
za ka tsa singu kya ka na ki da hi chu kukuya
Senhora.
sama si tebe kan ha nya da ya biki
Yeah. Abu Hangi. Yeah.
You might be wondering why I chose to begin a talk on the ethical issues of writing about indigenous colonization with a video and audio clip of a Kofan shaman treating me and allaying my fears concerning COVID-19. As the clips indicated, the shaman in question is Cesario Lusitante, a Kofan man from the community of Devuno. Cesario is my main collaborator on my current project, and will be the co-author of the monograph that will result from it. Although the book will focus on Cesario's shamanism, it will also describe the people against whom he most often uses it, shamans from the indigenous Quechua nation of Amazonian Ecuador, whom the Kofan call Napo because their homeland overlaps with the Napo River. In Devuno, Kofan people view the Napo as invaders determined to take over Kofan territory by eliminating its rightful indigenous residents, the Kofan. The odds favor the Napo. They number 55,000 compared to the 1,500 Kofan, and their ethnic federations are much more organized and powerful. Cesario's curing and commentary display the kind of relationship I have with him and many other Kofan people. Cesario offered to treat my body and headaches as he offers to treat so many of my ailments. He knows I'm at special risk of complications from COVID due to an extended battle with an infection known as descending necrotizing mediastinitis in 2015. When I visited Cesario in 2017, he was curious about the condition that kept me in the intensive care unit for 40 days and required 13 surgeries. In A'inge, I described the illness and the medical interventions as best as I could. When I suffered through a digestive problem in Devuno in 2018, Cesario treated me again. After drinking the hallucinogenic brew Yahe, the A'inge word for ayahuasca, or Banisteriopsis caapi with various plant additives, he peered into my flesh, shook his leaf bundle over me, and rubbed and sucked on my head and body to remove the pathogens. The intense physical contact and Yahe-induced inebriation made me feel extremely vulnerable, totally dependent on Cesario's care and goodwill. The next morning, he explained that my doctors had cut away most of the necrotizing tissue in 2015, but small sections remained, onto which kukuya, or malevolent supernatural agents, had affixed carnivorous invisible snails, which were causing my sickness. During the cure, he'd sucked them out and dispatched them. That day, after 3 weeks with no appetite and many pounds lost, I ate 2 huge meals. I was fine. I didn't know if or why Cesario's treatment worked. At the moment, I was more interested in my improved state than the ontological status of Cesario's transformation of my body. In 2021, Cesario spent so much time talking to me about COVID because he knew how much I feared it. His care was profoundly heartening. It reminded me of when I showed a Kofan woman a picture of me in the hospital from 2015. She broke into tears, saying she wouldn't be able to sleep after seeing the way I'd suffered. To put it mildly, I feel extremely close to many Kofan people, and I believe they feel the same way about me. The reason I wanted to use so much audio, video, and photography in this talk was to help communicate that shared sentiment. I also wanted you to hear Kofan people's direct testimonies about their current situation. Their own words and voices do a better job conveying the intensity of their stances than my academic prose ever could. And ultimately, this talk is about a contentious issue, the concept and experience of indigenous colonization. And I wanted to assure you that much of my supposed interpretation is a direct translation of Kofan accounts. I first began working with the Kofan in 1994. As a 20-year-old environmental and indigenous rights activist, I traveled to Ecuador to do research for my BA thesis on the Kofan's successful acts of resistance against the oil industry. After an interview with a Kofan leader, during which he admonished me for the exploitative, short-term nature of relations with anthropologists, I made a lifelong commitment to the Kofan as both an activist and an academic. I vowed to return to Kofan territory on a near-annual basis, whether working on an academic project, an activist campaign, or nothing. At this point, I've lived in Kofan communities for more than 5 years. My wife and I now have 5 Kofan ritual families. Currently, 2 of my ritual relatives are pursuing doctorates in anthropology at my university with me as their chair. We all live together at my house, including our ritual sibling's 8-year-old daughter. In multiple papers, I've cited the native anthropologist Kim Tallbear's ethical principle of standing with one's research collaborators. As I wrote in a 2020 article published in Commenting Ethnography, quote, "Standing with one's subjects is about negotiating a form of research in which our collaborators can change our deepest commitments. Such a relationship demands relating to our subjects as true colleagues and building shared social worlds with them in which we invest our political, scholarly, and emotional energies. In articulating such a form of involvement, Tallbear turns to feminist ideas on how we can make care central to our practice. Citing Donna Haraway, Tallbear advocates the creation of projects in which we become invested moral agents in our collaborators' lives. If we want to transcend the colonial nature of our work, Tallbear argues, we should seek such projects out and commit ourselves to them with the expectation of our transformation," end quote. The article, which is largely a self-critique of my activist and academic work, received good reviews. After sending her a draft, Tallbear assured me I got her concept right. Interestingly, the only negative reaction came from an English-speaking Kofan leader. He liked the article, but he said I was wrong to state that I never would or should claim Kofanness. To refuse to do so, he argued, would be to ignore or disrespect the Kofan individuals who told me I've become an A'i, the A'inge term for human being or Kofan. As a leader wrote in an email, quote, I think you underestimate your status within the Kofan world, or perhaps just don't understand it in some senses. I think you're very aware of the distinction we've made internally between status as A'i, a fluid condition involving culture, language, ancestry, relationships, etc., but never well defined, and Nacionalidad Kofan, a political reality based on affiliation, cultural ties, social, cultural, economic involvement, real and projected rights, etc. You, whether you like it or not, are considered internally by many, if not most Kofans, as at least a Kofan national, a successfully recruited and converted outsider who is now part of the economic, political, and social Kofan reality, who has at least conditional status as an A'i. In Zabalo, we frequently hear A'i Michael as a differential identification between you and another researcher named Mike. In your case, I think that your speaking A'inge is a huge part of your acceptance and why you are A'i in contrast to the other Mike. An interesting exercise for you might be to seek admittance as a legal member of a Kofan community. It'd make for an interesting paper, end quote. The point of this discussion is not that I'm Kofan. It's that alongside my ethical and intellectual commitment to centering Kofan voices and perspectives in my work, I have powerful cultural and emotional ties to my Kofan friends, family members, and collaborators. The relations are so deep that they've formed my moral and epistemological instincts in ways I might not understand. One consequence is that I side with the Kofan in virtually all conflicts that involve them. Doing so is partially reciprocation for their role in making my career and my life possible. But even more, I believe I've come to view the objective truth of and correct responses to such conflicts from a Kofan perspective. It might sound like simple bias, but it's more about my collaborators' transformation of my embodied perspectives rather than me writing my assumptions onto them. Consequently, when I ponder the circumstances of the Duvuno Kofan, the idea of the Napo's indigenous colonization of Kofan people and territory seems right, both empirically and ethically. Because of my intimate research relationships, I can recognize and even feel Kofan fear, anxiety, suffering, and animosity toward the Napo. When living with Cesario and Duvuno, I get just as nervous as he does when the dogs bark late at night. I sit up with him on the house platform. He holds a loaded shotgun in his lap, and we wait to see if the Napo have sent an assassin to kill him or a thief to steal my possessions. Due to the intense emotional overlap, perhaps I'm less conscious than I should be about my position as a North American professor. After all, my account of Napo colonization might do harm to the Napo, who are also an oppressed ethnic minority. That is the question at the heart of this talk. Am I right to take sides and report truths as I understand them, legitimate truths concerning Kofan suffering and displacement in Duvuno, or should I steer clear of this topic and these truths because of my identity and responsibilities as a Euro-American academic whose work can have consequences on multiple marginalized peoples? Cesario, Duvuno, and the Napo. As I stated earlier, this talk is part of a larger project. I've completed most of my research. Now I'm seeking fellowships that will give me time to write the book and produce a documentary about its findings. I have a working draft of a prospectus that explains why I'm interested in Duvuno and Cesario and what I hope to write about and with them. It reads as follows. Clifford Geertz once wrote that the anthropologist confronts the same grand realities as other scholars, but in context obscure enough to take the capital letters off. The proposed project will confront such grand realities as religion, colonization, violence, and indigeneity in an ethnography that will leave the capital letters intact because it will radically redefine the terms to which they're attached. The book will be titled Visionary Violence, Shamanism, Dispossession, and Death in Amazonia. Employing 3 years of focused research, as well as 3 decades of academic and activist collaborations with the indigenous Kofan nation of Ecuador, it will explore the visionary struggles of Cesario Lusitante, a Kofan shaman who heals the bodily consequences of ethnic conflict and territorial dispossession with the use of yahe, or ayahuasca, Amazonia's most important hallucinogen. Based on detailed analysis in the Kofan language of A'enge, Visionary Violence's engaging prose, complex characters, and focus on Yahe, a plant of increasing global fascination, will draw a broad readership. It will also contribute to scholarship on indigenous religion, post-colonial violence, illness, healing, and death, and the anthropology of value. Although I'll write the book, Cesario will be listed as its co-author, given the role his words and insights play in the text. Committed to decolonizing my discipline, I'll credit my Kofan colleagues as true co-producers of academic knowledge. To maximize the book's impact, I'll share its main insights in a short online documentary with versions in A'enge, English, and Spanish. Having worked on multiple films, I know how useful they can be to extend the reach and teachability of books. Visionary Violence is set in the Kofan community of Devuno. Devuno is Cesario's home, and it's experiencing drastic forms of change that produce bodily ailments amenable to shamanic treatment. Currently, Devuno's territory is under threat from the encroachment of commercial hunters and loggers and the clearing of forests for taro plantations. Most importantly, in the late 1960s, waves of Quechua migrants, whom the Kofan call Napo, began to follow new oil roads to settle on Kofan land. I describe their incursion as indigenous colonization because they have no ancestral claims to Kofan territory and are far more numerous and powerful than the people they're displacing. The Kofan lament how the Napo's intensive farming and hunting transformed the region's ecology. Even more seriously, the Kofan believe Napo shamans caused virtually all their deaths and aimed to destroy Devuno entirely. Cesario is the one person with the knowledge and powers to blunt, if not stop, Napo aggression. I first went to Devuno in 1998, when I met Cesario and his son Octavio, who was my main research assistant. I returned in 2017 and 2018 to gauge residents' interest in hosting a study of shamanism. The trips produced an agreement that outlines research topics and community participation and compensation. I began fieldwork in 2019 as a participant observation ethnographer, and I spent much of my time with Cesario and Octavio. Cesario treated patients as we drank yahe and discussed our visions. I took notes on everything I could, but the darkness in which shamanic curing occurs required new methods. Accordingly, I video recorded dozens of healing sessions with a high-definition night vision camera. Watching the videos provided a rich opportunity to analyze real-time shamanic practice with Cesario and Octavio, whose gesture-filled commentary I also video recorded for further analysis. Alongside videos, I have hundreds of field notes and more than 70 hours of interviews with Cesario and other Devuno residents. I'm the only person who can write this book. No other anthropologist speaks the Kofan language, and none have lived in Kofan communities as long as I have, over 5 years. I have deep emotional ties to Kofan people, who are some of my closest friends. I'm chairing 2 English-speaking Kofan doctoral students in my department, for whom I secured funding as well as a place to live, my own home. My academic and activist commitments to the Kofan are lifelong. I am president of the Kofan Survival Fund, a US-based nonprofit that raises funds for Kofan-directed land rights, medical, and educational projects in Ecuador. As with all my books, all royalties from Visionary Violence will go to my Kofan colleagues, including Cesario. Visionary Violence will begin with the preface, 2 bodies. It will prepare readers to appreciate Kofan cultural difference by reflecting on a common object, the Aivo, or body. Cesario's body contains numerous entities that only yahe-drinking shamans can see, all of which are kukuya, or malevolent and supernatural agents, that allow Cesario to cure and to kill. Because of the kukuya inside his body, as well as his kukuya allies outside it, Cesario's shamanic actions are never entirely his own. His body is plural, incorporating, and expansive, unlike the Western idea of a bounded, unitary, and wholly physical body. In the introduction, I will outline the book's topic, site, and argument. I employ a value-based approach that views human action as value-directed and value-productive. The first aspect relates to literature on the roles of values, ethics, and morality in human action. The second emphasizes the way such action produces different forms and levels of value, which I conceptualize as the culturally variable potential to act in desirable ways. To comprehend Cesario shamanism, I argue, we must underestimate the values that guide his actions and how those actions increase his potential by endowing him with new qualities, new relations, and new objects, all of which merge in his body. Chapter 1, Cesario, will share basic details and defining aspects of Cesario's biography. It will also bring Cesario to life, his appearance, his habits, his ways of moving and speaking, and his lively, sharp humor. Chapter 2, Becoming a Napo Community, will outline the history of and current conditions in Devuno. It will describe how Napo settlers entered the region, gradually transformed it, and eventually took over Devuno. Soon, life in Devuno became dominated by qualities the Kofan associate with the Napo: large-scale land clearing, excessive hunting, domestic violence, alcohol-fueled fighting, aggressive speech, unwillingness to reciprocate, and favoring cash over subsistence. Simultaneously, shamanic violence intensified. Kofan people now fear that the Napo want to kill them to take their land. They rely on Cesario to protect them from Napo shamanic aggression by preventing and treating its bodily consequences. Chapter 3, The Shamanism of Gregoriotye, will provide an account of the structure, logic, and practice of Kofan shamanism in Devuno before countering Napo attacks became its primary function. I will focus on Gregoriotye, a powerful shaman who was Cesario's father-in-law. Gregoriotye shamanism, much of which Cesario learned, involved a panoply of Yahé-revealed instruments, beings, and acts. Chapter 4, The Shamanism of Cesario, will describe how the coming of the Napo familiarized Cesario with a new form of shamanism. After all, a shaman can only cure a malady if he too possesses the weapon that caused it. As Devuno residents suffered Napo shamanic violence, Cesario had no choice but to master it. Chapter 5, Healing Events, will detail actual healing practices as video recorded by me and analyzed with Cesario and Octavio. It's one thing to learn about the abstract structure of shamanism. It's quite another to witness Cesario perform it. Given my video records, my accounts will be among the most nuanced portraits of shamanic practice ever produced. Chapter 6, The Napo, Sickness, and Death, will focus on the illness and death narratives told by all Devuno residents. Everyone I work with spoke freely about their own sicknesses, the deaths of their friends and family members, and the reasons Napo shamans had attacked them. The reader will learn just how concerned the Kofan are about Devuno's precarious position. Chapter 7, A Shaman's Demise, will share Cesario's accounts of Napo shamans' ceaseless attempts to kill him. Even though Cesario swears that he's never killed anyone, Napo shamans accuse him of attacking their people. I'll present Cesario's comments on his own impending death and the eschatology through which he understands it. Cesario will become a kukuya when he dies, but he will remember to carry into death the Napo individuals most responsible for Devuno's plight. Conclusion, the value of Cesario will return to the book's largely implicit theoretical framework to summarize the ideals that oriented Cesario's shamanic path and the value with which it endowed him. The conclusion will also address Yahé's growing appeal to Western spiritual seekers and biomedical researchers who see it as a possible treatment for depression, anxiety, and addiction. I want the world to know what Yahé-based visionary healing means to Cesario. Westerners must look past romanticizing stereotypes to appreciate how Amazonian religious practitioners confront such threats as indigenous colonization, which clash with common images of the region and the dilemmas its people face. Living with the Napo. I want to provide more detail on the Napo's incursion than appears in my prospectus. In the late 1960s, Napo settlers began arriving to the Agua Rica River on a road Texaco built to transport its oil out of the Amazonian lowlands. Due to centuries of epidemic disease, the Kofan numbered far less than 1,000, though they used the whole basin for hunting, fishing, and residential sites. As one Napo explained to me, his father simply traveled down the road and claimed a piece of land, which he, as well as the government, considered empty. Yes, he saw Kofan footprints and hunting shelters. He even saw Kofan people pass by in their canoes. But he got a title for his landholding without saying a word to the Kofan. He'd officially become a colono, or colonist. The government agency overseeing such claims even decided to use the term in its name, the National Institute for the Colonization of the Ecuadorian Amazonian region. Soon, Napo communities surrounded Devuno. In the early years, Devuno was still led by the powerful shaman chief, Gregorioye, whom the Napo feared. If the Napo got too close to Devuno's residential center, Gregorioye confronted them and told them to leave. The Napo knew he could transform into an anaconda or a jaguar to kill them. Despite Gregorioye's reputation, the Napo arrived in greater and greater numbers, clearing land for cattle, coffee, cacao, and subsistence crops. Their homeland was overcrowded, and the soil and game were depleted. Gregorioye died in 1978. His less powerful successor, Julioye, betrayed his people. In exchange for supernatural weapons from their main shaman, Julioye told a group of Napo they could move into Devuno, which by that time was fully demarcated. No other Kofan residents, including the community president, knew about or agreed to Julioye's offer, which greatly angered them. According to my collaborators, when the Kofan confronted these Napo in a community meeting, the latter agreed to live by Kofan ways. They'd learn A'enge, wear Kofan dress, and follow Kofan subsistence practices. In effect, they promised to become Kofan. Perhaps naively, the Kofan believed them. A few residents told me the Napo's pledge was written in a signed contract, though no one has a copy. Some Napo married Kofan women, and some came as Zeus or with Napo spouses. But as more and more of the original settlers' relatives arrived, the Napo gave up on any pretense of changing their ways. They lied to us, the Kofans say. Soon, their population became as large as the Kofans. As Kofan and Napo people agree, Napo families have as many as 12 or 13 children. Kofan couples, in contrast, rarely have more than 4 or 5. In what seemed like the blink of an eye, the children of the original Napo residents got married. Devuno's Napo population was set to expand exponentially. By the late 1990s, it didn't feel like a Kofan community at all. With the support of the Kofan Ethnic Federation, the Devuno Kofan convinced the original Napo socios, or community members, to concentrate their homes and fields on their own land inside Devuno's boundaries. The Napo plot amounted to 700 hectares, 50 each for the 14 Napo families who moved onto it. Soon, the Napo began calling the land their own community. They even gave it a name, 14 Quichua, or 14 Quichua. But other Napo remained in the larger Kofan settlement, including those who'd married Kofan people. Living alongside them became virtually impossible. Patricio, a Napo man who married a Kofan woman, is one of the few Napo who has truly become Kofan, according to Devuno residents. When I interviewed him about his former people, he echoed what other Kofan people said. He spoke from experience and discussed the ways of his own family members. Patricio and others told me that wherever they live, inside Devuno or surrounding it, the Napo prohibit the Kofan from hunting or fishing near their homes. The Napo themselves hunt excessively, often to acquire masses of meat for parties, especially wedding feasts. They deforest large plots to plant cash crops and sell lumber. They use chemical poisons to fish, damaging the area's waterways. Instead of relying on the Kofan's non-alcoholic staple of kiku, or plantain drink, they consume manioc beer every day. Frequently, they also drink cane liquor, get excessively drunk, provoke fights with the Kofan, and beat their spouses and children. The Napo also refuse to contribute significant labor or food to communal events. If they do attend, they insult the Kofan relentlessly. After a logging road was built through Devuno in 2009, non-resident Napo constantly passed through on their motorcycles. They often showed up at Kofan parties. There are stories of them raping Kofan women, beating Kofan men and stealing Kofan property. In 2019, a group of Napo robbed and shot 2 mestizo merchants who traveled along the road selling vegetables. When I arrived to Devuno in 2017 to begin preparing for my project, Kofan antagonism toward the Napo was total. All my Kofan interviewees told me the same things. They couldn't live happily. They were constantly sick and afraid. They interpreted virtually all deaths as the results of Napo shamanic attack. They knew the Napo population was expanding and little land remained. The only obstacles between the Napo and Devuno's 6,500 hectares of forest were the Kofan. Devuno residents were convinced the Napo sought to eliminate them entirely. The only one who could protect them was Cesario. Napo killing. I realized that Kofan reports of the Napo's problematic ways sound like typical ethnic stereotypes voiced by an aggrieved and consequently bigoted people. Although I've witnessed some of the alleged practices, I learned of most of them only through Kofan reports. The Kofan accounts, however, were entirely consistent. They also matched the portrayal shared by Patricio, the Napo man who became Kofan. Voicing Kofan criticisms of the Napo is difficult for me. It feels strange, even wrong. I understand how questionable it is for a North American academic to make such damning statements about a marginalized ethnic group. But the Kofan believe in and experience Napo antagonism with brutal force. Simply ignoring it, I suggest, would be an abdication not only of my ethnographic duties, but my ethical ones. I feel most responsible to the Kofan, whose suffering and uncertain future are always on my mind. It might be easy for anthropologists to doubt the truth of shamanic violence. The Napo occupation of the Kofan homeland, however, is beyond dispute. Although I have hours of interviews documenting Kofan stances toward the Napo, I want to share a few segments regarding the most serious allegation, that the Napo and their shamans are killing Devuno residents, at least partially to steal their land. Secondhand reports of Kofan fear, sadness, and anger would not communicate the accusations with the requisite humanity and urgency. So listen as Cesario, Berta, Josefina, and Gervasio describe their predicament.
Napo atese choha hongwehetse atese a imadanya.
Nane Napo mama ke apa ya tsaha Napo ha tsaha tise pa iama tsaupa tsu. Ai ma fiti atese pa.
Ihama tsaupa.
Ai ma fiti atese pa chu ai. Iama nane iama tise pa iama chu tsaka iama.
Tsama maha Napo kuraga aki ti tsama tsoni iha o ai sendensi.
Nane maha da tsa ai sendensi tsenda maha iama bita tsna ai ma aki fiti pa kanse pa. Napo.
Akia.
Nyase akse nyaye mat atefa yamat se hepande. Se he chumat atefa. Tsama tsaha akisendeni mat fiti tise ti kura ki iha. Utsomita nyaye ma fiti ma festis no nyama mas danyumba ma efaya. Tsaka has Napo ai. Sende chu ke fes kosai. Sende tsaha o shi problema me ame ma aho pa efaya. Tsaka ega ai. Ke sitsa Napo ai ya fiti fa.
Da tise panaka ke fiti
kuya ke fiti ku paganse.
Me como se foi se iha chama abia Napo.
Tsa foi sai da mag ai ma ke akia ma tiga uchi to wa ai ko tsuga ta.
Tsaka ba tsaka ha.
Tayupi ke.
Tayupi
tsaka
va Napo vani himbi chwe kanda. Minge ki kanse faya.
Sabe, a te kanse vai aqui ya.
Abogatse.
Se panaka kanse faya tsaka na. Ha huwa ka se fa faya.
Ni hatse ai fa faya ambini.
Me pa me tumba. Tayupi ke kura shiki katsu disa ai ke fiti faya me tsi mai has. Ma tsa da nyu he nya. Kanse vai yangi. Sama tsana po pu pa tsi ngi ma ega ba no tsama a kyambe sendan dai fa. E ava ta fa.
Menge kias titse hukanenge Napo ke kani fayati o tsangeti vani kahe faya.
Magata faya tao tisu pa ande ve su ta chu. Haya mitsu.
Nyama kisu haya mitsu.
Haya mitsu.
Apa ini fitik papaya nyapa ya zongan.
Nya da nya ya ye ma fiti chuma ya na ne as ta sa ka pushe pakani chunda ka sendai nya ya ma fiti.
Ke ya ma.
Ha nya ya ma.
Mi kumbatsu ke ya ma.
Da hanyo nya she stersita sa ndo sendai ma has akya nya ya et ates kan se ya se kori makashi tive mandani. Ke se pas ka inap kuranga ape pa. So nya ya laun ha ga pa hi ha. Na kwangi adas kai tsumatre ka 4 ke pakati. Nani krimbit saka nya mamanya make minga fiti ba saka itu fiti ba mai
Da mikumba tsombo vanacho vatisa na ponde krika. Minga ki asite. Aki konda seka hake inhachuma. Okay, até sempre ganhou tsita.
ba kisuwa ai ma pishe chonde
Ha.
na nya zende kuma akinya in ba ya chi ajuta tsunyando shuma zende ku sendai vas kura nga ha pa sendai vas nyando shuma fiti fa
Zakande.
ken su singinya na chi angina na chi ba chi amanginya ma kan dis ma fiti akingi ha
Sama taha nya mesuchete.
nya me su ke ka utsama
Maha napoha ke a ima fitifa zambita danjufa. Ke onken gematsu danjufa.
nya onke mas na ya basta es na pasin mas ke kan da psakin
Da foi se a ima vatsu a ima danjum biti. O fitin biti.
me ke kan ma fiti bi ke kan gi han nyando shima nya ya ma ke tsai fiti fa
Ke ya.
nya ma ke tsai tu sendai pas nya ma fiti pa 15 si tsuna za te sendai ba fiti nya ma ken tsna punya ga kunda
Hungwe it's inhafa napo kuraga ha a ima danjunye zambita fiti.
Nya te ma he te minget o ingi mande a e ma se fai ma ti se pa ande ma itsa e kendi ha ma tsa ti ko ke a he te ma kan se tsumita o minge se ma ka mi kuma bo tsa ga na me na pu ingi a e pu hes ma pu she pu zende tsa ka a ke a hu pa jo a e ke ti ku tsa ga da nyu fa ke nya i ha he
A fu pa chu a
tsa tsa a hu pa ya me tsa ka tsa nya ma ti ku minge se ke ni ku i kan se fa ya to se tsa nya ma tse tsa nya ma no ingi tse ne tsa ka na ku ra familia ba a me na sende tsa ga da nyu ya te se fa ya a i ma minge se ya ku kama e po te tenku pa ke ti se pa tse si ku tsa tin ku ya te se fa a ke tsa hu pa ya te se ke ma chi ke me e ke se enemigo be tsi ha fa nyo tse
Me kumba. Ke ande veki ke ande veti inha zende kura.
tsa ga ma tsa ga chi ko ha ke ha
Sundinde kura.
tsa ga na po de me ya fa tsa ga me ha yo ba te na po ma ai ne ke ma pu she chi ma ha ni ku mu nan ka ne nya me nya chi ya cho
Ti suma. Me kumba ki paia. Paia tiki.
pa se chi manda
Ke tayo pa makusha ba ve mani se.
tsa ga ti su ka na minge inge ma ya ka inge ma se na danga na po da inge pa te si pa kan se fa inge
Na po dani.
tata bana ingi bana henchu tinya me na punta unchi bana fa
At this point, I want to return to the talk's central question. Am I right or wrong to discuss the Napo's violence and usurpation of Kofan land in a talk at a U.S. university, in my forthcoming book, or even in the Aingay documentary I hope to produce? As I described above, I feel I've been recruited into a Kofan position that's not only ethical and political, but effective and epistemological. I believe and even feel what my collaborators tell me, show me, and live with me. I want to share their story to report and perhaps help stop the harm that's done to them, no matter who's causing it. After all, my Kofan colleagues are not simply my academic collaborators. They're my friends and my family. Some live with me in San Antonio, and others contact me every day through WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger. We've shared each other's homes and lives and desires and fears for so long. I worry especially about Cesario. He's nearly 70, and he often says he's sick. His hands tremble constantly. His condition looks like early-stage Parkinson's to me. Cesario claims it's the result of a Napo attack that occurred when he let down his guard. No matter how deeply I believe in shamanic killing, Cesario believes in it absolutely, as do almost all Kofan and Napo. Reportedly, however, the Napo have finally realized that Cesario remains too strong for their shamans to kill. 2 years ago, Octavio called me in San Antonio and told me that 3 Napo with shotguns were seen at dawn, waiting outside the house he shares with his father. Luckily, Cesario was already working in his fields. But there's little doubt that they were there to kill him, or at least threatened to do so. Octavio knew the likely culprits. I sent money to hire a lawyer to denounce the potential killers in an Ecuadorian court. The police, though, said they could do nothing until the crime actually occurred. Taking everything I've learned in Devuno into account, and realizing what nearly 3 decades of becoming close to Kofan people has done to me, the idea of indigenous colonization feels right, both ethically and empirically. I think it describes exactly what the Napo are continuing to do to the lives and lands of the Devuno Kofan. For the rest of you, I imagine the concept isn't so simple. It might even appear to be the perfect example of an oxymoron. So it is. I expect and welcome your critiques. To help put Devuno's current position into perspective, I leave you with 2 final clips. Cesario's son-in-law Clemente lamenting the community's fate and praising Cesario's attempt to forestall it, and Eliberto, a Kofan shaman from a different community, curing Cesario himself. Thank you.
Teki tayo e nyanga konda se redi koe aangi kone. Foi Cepek sa hindi vane.
Foi Cepek is the maiko ingi mat redi koe ha. Na puke tsandanyo ni apa aindek. Sa mangi chia foi teni ha redi koe nya suero kanse si kanse pakingi ha. Tumbe na punde ke aki ai uma inya senye o ai uma kaminga ai ma fiti ha ma tsatsu ingi be defensor be kanse chukinya tisa manya investigangi ainda kamaki. Ngwasa problema mas da hunde tesi kana pungato. Senda da iha tsu papashi iha ti ingi ha napu kanse pakinha. Sa kambanya alta mai ko ushapa. Nya suero kanse da ingi ti tso kani hai vai kinha. So banya suero mamaki dice papes kuranga sende ba pitine. Se fat ingi ai ne pia pori ai se pa vai kinha. Kambanya hovanya suero bai pai to enya me astege kenda te ku bia pinya ingi ma kinyo es fiti tiame mai. Satsu unico ingi ma ingi ba ti hanyo teita kan kan. Nya te chutatsu ingi ma huba nya suero ma ke so he pai pa nya ingi ha mitingi se pa nya ke na ne tente ke ai ma ai ma se fesunde ke pai sendenyi ha sendandai ka sa
tese choiku
me o shambi to sama tunya ma unico nya suero e pa jo pa nya sama atingi mai ko ta ma nya suero ma a pengi ha ma ke tise pa matise at sa nya suero chi biri kora to fiti pa bi sama rande tise matise de pores nya suero pa ki ha na ne ma ke tai se ba na puante bedaya kanya ha ba te generación na puante bedaya ya tinapus ka va ta ka ma nya mai ko na punde ke ma ba aste at sa mina pa ta nyu ni ha ya sa pa she ai ma fiti ti ya pa ma chia fiti si nya se ke nya suero pa mi na inja to en je pa ya to mi tai ti se ken bi se ke hian ga fa sa nyu ga me ene pi ya
Thank you so much for this clip. That's really giving us a lot to think about. So I think I mean, normally we would have a Q&A session here, but I think looking at the clock, for those of us attending in person, I think we'll have to start leaving this room because there is a class happening here at 1 p.m. But perhaps there's a couple of questions coming in on Zoom. So maybe for those of us attending on Zoom, we could pick up some of these questions if that's okay. Is that okay, Professor Cepek?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if people want to ask. There's 5, 6, 7, I mean, a lot of amazing questions, by the way. I'd love to, I don't know if these are going to be recorded for me so I can answer them later, at least thinking about them. But it's just a super complex situation. These folks have been talking to Napo people forever. People need to remember that a lot of the major problems in Amazonia, including Kofan territory, are colonization, our takeover of indigenous lands by settlers. It just so happens that often those settlers are other indigenous people. And then, you know, how you approach shamanic attack is complicated. I did work with a few Napo folks, but in this situation, it's really hard because the antagonism is so high. I work with a Kofan person doing interviews. It's part of my agreement. He can't even go into Napo households because of these conflicts. So this is very much only from the Kofan perspective and folks like Patricio who have become Kofan. And I need to make that very, very clear in my research. But as far as I know, everybody here in Devuno thinks this. I wasn't aware of it beforehand. And Napo folks too, of course, believe in shamanism very strongly, no matter what kind of smartphones they have. This is a very contemporary phenomenon. So I don't know if I don't have any more time, I think, to say anything than that. Unless I'm wrong.
Sorry, I was cleaning up the room for those attending in person, but we can continue the conversation on Zoom if people, I know some people may have to go to other things at 1 p.m., but if people wanted to stick around on Zoom, that's wonderful.
That would be great.
Any additional questions coming in?
There are so many questions. I don't know if the people who asked them are still on Zoom or not, though. So. Shoko, do you just recommend I keep talking about the questions? Or Christian, maybe Shoko's no longer present here.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, they just took my Wi-Fi down in my entire building, unfortunately. But I would personally love to, it looks like there's 53 people still on Zoom here. So I think you'll have plenty of listeners if you continue to answer the question.
Sure, and people on Zoom can also do the Q&A, right? That's actually, they're probably the only people doing the Q&A. So I'm, they even hear like this first question about how the Napo are one single entity, large in numbers. I actually talked to one of my own PhD students who's done now fabulous dissertation, fabulous ethnographer. He worked with Napo people, and the population numbers are actually, I was wrong, probably 60,000 to 100,000 Quechua folks. I use the word Napo, of course, because like I say, I'm trying to front a Kofan perspective here. First of all, there's a limit on what anthropologists can do when these perspectives are so deep-seated. And I think you have to take seriously the possibility that they're real. Shamanism itself, I have a very strange perspective on it. I'm pretty much a materialist, not a big believer, but strange things happen. And I feel my own fears coming up in some of these circumstances. And there is a slide between shamanic violence and actual physical violence here. And the taking over of Kofan territory is entirely physical, non-shamanic. So that's part of it. And oil mining and market, those are big problems. In Devuno itself, not that much, but in other Kofan communities, definitely. This is also not about all Kofan people. This is about one community. There are other communities where the Napo aren't on their mind, and there are other communities where you have a few Napo people. By the way, there are things that I haven't said here that are, believe it or not, all those awful stereotypes I shared, people actually getting killed, some really nasty stuff that I left out, multiple deaths in Napo households when I was there. So, and some of that was in Devuno and outside of Devuno. So, there are limits on what I'm talking about here. Let's see, black magic, sorcery. Once again, it's not my, I think, role or power to be able to change the way these people, use shamanism or what they believe. I don't think, one gringo, half gringo, maybe a little bit of an Ai can do that. And, Kofan folks are pretty clear that they're not the ones attacking anybody. Although, of course, there are definitely Napo families who feel attacked. And that's probably what's behind this drive to potentially actually kill Cesario with a shotgun. But it's complicated. It's too much for me to be an intervener in that sense. Dialogue. It's not like this is secret stuff. This stuff gets talked about in meetings. It gets talked about with ethnic federation assemblies. It's all public knowledge down there. There's nothing I say here that hasn't been said directly between Kofan people themselves and Napo people, including in, open meetings. And it's, the talk has been tried, but there is no success. There's no faith right now on the Kofan part in terms of trying to get the Napo to, give up their land or stop attacking them. They feel like they're, marked for elimination, literally, by the Napo to get a hold of this land, and they don't want to share it. It's just a small piece of territory, remember, compared to what they had before. It's essential to their own future. A varied Napo people. That's an interesting point about lowland Quechua being decried as acculturated or inauthentic. Not at all what my own perspective. I was a student of Norman Whitten. He's still probably my most important interlocutor in terms of, and he's a specialist working with Quechua folks around Puyo and outside of Puyo. I don't know if that's a risk here because you're stressing shamanism. So I think acculturation might be the last thing your folks would think about. On the other hand, lack of indigenous harmony and reality of indigenous conflict with each other, that very much is part of this message. And that's a really, really complicated message. And that's obviously my main fear about discussing this. Yet, the point of the talk was, how can I, work with Kofan folks in the way that I do, this being so close to them, and just totally ignore or deny what they tell me, all of them, is the most serious threat to their very lives in their community. As ethically, I don't think I can do that. And empirically, it would just be not an accurate report of how they feel and what they see these problems to be. It's a strange place for an ethnographer to be. So that's obviously why I included so much information about the nature of my relationships with Kofan folks. And I'll have to negotiate that. I'm going to take all this feedback very seriously and think about it, and also share it with all the Kofan people I can. They already know. I mean, Cesario knows all this. He knows what the book's going to be on. He's like, make me co-author. They all know how I feel about them. They're all trying to kill me. I have nothing to hide. So once again, this is not bringing to light something on the ground between people. It might be bringing it to light for people who aren't on the ground, such as readers. I mean, maybe, you talk about it in a Kofan language documentary, but you don't write about it so much, or be very careful about the way you do. Longer historical critique, obviously. Mediate community relations, it's just something I can't do. Let's see, environmental conflicts. How do you think the reality of indigenous colonization sits with the broader political and environmental conflicts in Amazonia? It's interesting, when I posted that I was giving this talk and I posted the abstract to the Amazonianist listserv, a bunch of people wrote to me and they're like, yeah, the same thing's happening in my area. At least if you're working in Amazonian Ecuador, even Peru, maybe even in Brazil. And in Ecuador, I mean, the Quechua population is huge. And for specific communities, I mean, if you're working in other communities like Dureno, where I wrote my last book about, they don't talk about Napo folks at all. It's all Kokama, mestizos. But in Devuno, that is the focus. And all of the land holdings completely surrounding their territory are held by Napo people. They were the original colonists. They got in early. They worked for the oil companies. Some Kofan people did too. So they are the immediate threat. And I'm just trying to make a very specific case here about this community. So in the grand scheme of things, the threats facing Amazonia, I don't think it's a very huge threat, right? Colonization itself in all its forms, that is a huge threat. But there are so many bigger problems in other places. But once again, it's being true and honoring my relationships and agreements with the people I worked on this project. And, you know, it's not just some abstract thing to me. These are people I care about very much, and they're all individuals to me, just like our close friends or family members would be. Shamanic violence, other historical situations outside of Amazonia be a super interesting one to think about. I will look into that. Risks of studying shamanism, that is an interesting one. I do have a fear that, you know, people will think, one of my ritual sisters recently mentioned to me that word on the street is I'm trying to become a shaman. I'm learning from Cesario. I am not. Although he said he could teach me if I wanted to. You know, for various complicated reasons, I don't want to. And then you're, you know, labeled as part of the problem. And I think you would be potentially, there have been shamans who've been killed with shotguns. I mean, it's not just supernatural attack. This stuff results in real deaths. So for me, it, you know, being seen so close with one side of this situation does make me a little bit afraid personally. And I have, you know, strange people ask me if I believe in it. I would say, you know, probably not. But then, you know, certain pains develop and you think about conflicts, who could be doing it? And, you know, it's kind of that back in the back of your mind. There is some sort of strange implicit background belief there. I don't think it's top in my mind, but there are, I think, risks associated with this kind of work. If we're serious about healing these risks, please get in touch. Nina, let's get in touch. Like I said, this stuff is deep, it's old, and the last thing they're going to want is to be taught by a gringo how to handle their problematic situations. You got to understand, when Cesario is drinking ayahuasca or yahe, that's how they say it, Kofan, he sees this. It's direct sensory experience. Who is doing the attack? You take out the dart, it has initials written on it. And even in meetings where there's accusations of shamanic violence, you know, weapons are produced saying, here is this guy sent it. And there is no doubt on his part about what's happening. And, you know, it's not as if I can solve those problems or change land relations in Devuno in any way. I don't want to see anybody get hurt, obviously Napo or Kofan. And it's interesting what actually solving this situation would look like. It's a very, very complicated situation. Chris, let's see. Differences in any, by the way, Shoko, if I need to shut up, just give me a thumbs up or something like that.
No, I think we are good on Zoom as long as we
okay,
good. But I also want to be respectful of your time as well. And I'm also just like happy to read questions if you.
This is the first time I've ever written or spoken about this, so feedback is essential. And like I said, I'm not quite sure in which way my own ethical and epistemological and ethnographic instincts have been shaped. So this could come off as like, what the hell are you talking about, Mike? Why are you talking about this at all? And I want to see if that's the case or not, because I feel like I need a mirror placed up to me. I share this with Kofan people. They're going to be like, you know, right on, exactly. Right. But to the academic community, I'm not sure. So let's say difference between Napo and non-Indigenous settlers. Like I said, in Devuno, there aren't really many non-Indigenous settlers directly in contact with that community. If you go to other communities, it's very, very different. And the thing about Kokama or mestizos, they don't have shamanic powers. A little of them know magia, you know, magic, but the Devuno Kokfar aren't afraid of that, you know, and so non-Indigenous people can't kill them. This was an early realization. My God, you have oil companies, you have mining, you have all this stuff, and you're You think all your sicknesses are caused by shamanism? You know, it was a big surprise for me decades ago, but it's true. And, you know, this is something we know from the literature and something I can't deny. And if I really want to honor what people say to me, I have to take it seriously. Qualitative difference between the shamanic violence, the major theme material, and the other forms of dispossession and violence enacted by non-Indigenous settlers. Yeah, I think that violence is very real. You don't have non-Indigenous settlers killing people as often, although there have been threats of that happening too. So I need to think more about that. Are shamans always male? Lou, not always, but almost always. There was a pretty powerful female Kofan shaman in a remote community, but she was so careful about the prohibition. She didn't want to work with any outsiders, even talk to many Kofan people. I would have loved to work with her, but she recently died, unfortunately. There are myths about female Kofan shamans, but there aren't any currently practicing in Ecuador. It's a very gendered practice. I've written about that before. Read the questions. We can't see them. Oh, I'm sorry, Christina. I've been responding to questions. I thought everybody could see these questions, Shoko. I guess not. It's just me, huh?
I've been making them visible to the audience as you touch on them, but I guess I could just make everything visible to everyone. Sorry about that. That was confusing. I'm also just happy to read some of the questions if that would kind of help you think through some of those rather than kind of
fine with me either way. I see a comment from Jean Langdon here, who's a fabulous ethnographer, works with Siona folks who have had relations with the Kofan for forever. Similar case, even more violence because of narco trafficking. Luckily in Davuno, there is no narco trafficking, so that's not an issue. You know, when Plan Colombia kicked in, it was an issue in other Kofan communities, but luckily that's fallen to the wayside. Interethnic conflict increasing because of narco trafficking. I can imagine that very much being the case, although I don't see that where I'm working now. How do you navigate the internal diversity within the Kofan? How diversity in political projects and maybe opinions regarding the Napo? Hate to say it, Danielle, in Davuno, there's no diversity of opinion regarding the Napo. I mean, I've talked not only interviews, but I just talked to everybody in the community, as many people as I could. And these are like universal sentiments. There are one, maybe two young Kofan guys who've married Napo women, I think, who might feel differently. They're embroiled in political conflicts. People feel like they become allies of the Napo, just one or two people who are really problematic figures. And I didn't want to talk about them at all because I have responsibilities to them and I don't want anything I write to reflect badly on these people who are involved in politics. But so there is a bit of diversity there, which I guess I should acknowledge more. But just the overwhelming sense with everybody I really work with is there's uniformity of opinion on this issue. Have the Napo, Scott Sakata, a guy who studied Kofan shamanism many years ago and a good friend and a supporter of the Kofan. Have the Napo also moved on to Siona lands farther east? I don't know. I know there are people working with the Siona that I've talked to about this topic or who perhaps are here listening. And I'm not quite sure about Napo presence on Siona lands, but I would imagine it's there. Another one, Danielle, how do you enable your narrative to portray a non-monolithic group unless they're monolithic? Good point, Danielle. Sometimes, like I said, there is uniformity of opinion. On the Napo side, that's interesting. And I need to make very clear, this is not a symmetrical project. This is about Kofan people and Kofan stances with some minimal work with Napo folks. Getting really good research with Napo people. I would want to learn the language, but the biggest issue is it is ethically impossible for me in this community to do this work equally with Napo and Kofan folks because of like, Mike, why are you going to do an interview with the guy who's killing my brother? I don't want to talk to him. I don't want to look at him. And then you want, your Kofan partner to go with, and what are you trying to figure out that we're lying to you or something like that? It is a really, really, really sensitive issue to do that kind of work. I've mentioned it, wanting to do it, and people said, no, it's dangerous. People don't feel comfortable going into those kinds of situations. It's really sketchy, actually, on the ground. Not so much for me, but for COFON people. Emmanuel, thanks a lot for your presentation. Look forward to reading your book. I'm a French PhD student, and I work with both Maihuna people, Western Tucanoans, like Sion and Sequoia, and Napo people. Oh, great, good, you're working with both. Maihuna people have also mentioned to me similar accounts about Napo invasions in their villages, disputes with Napo people in assemblies, territorial conflicts in particular, also about the claim by Napo people to be part of the protected area project. I think, like I said, I had people write to me working in multiple countries and saying, this is exactly what's going on where I'm working now. Even Napo people being involved in some pretty nasty invasions into communities where people aren't necessarily in regular contact with outsiders, being the point of the spear of colonization in Amazonia. So I'd love to see the results of your research, Emmanuel, and to talk to you more about it. Anonymous, how have you engaged with other Indigenous researchers within anthropology to think about not repeating colonial patterns in your research? Super important question. As I said, I've been in touch with Kim Tallbear. While I was thinking about the ethics of my work, I work with, 2 COFON students who are talk to me about everything and are listening into this talk. There's many people who don't have degrees I consider to be COFON intellectuals or researchers. I share everything I do with them and talk about it. Outside of Amazonia, Native North American scholars, Pacific scholars, my networks aren't that great, but I would like to get some more feedback on this. But once again, not all Indigenous folks feel the same. And I do feel like the kind of research relationship I have with COFON people is pretty specific and fairly unique. But yeah, I obviously want to get more Indigenous researchers to give me feedback on all of this work. I wonder too whether I could talk about Indigenous colonization, but I can't avoid this point from my ethnographic data as you do. Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah, you can't avoid it. Next question. Can I also ask you, personal interest, how do you negotiate collaborations with Indigenous authors? Oh, complicated. With Cesario, it was very clear. I didn't intend to work just with him. I was going to work with 3 different shamans, spend more time there. You realize he's the only one in the community. So I have a community level agreement, right? Communities have strong autonomy in COFON politics. They can decide whether they want to work with an outside researcher or not. If you're working with just a life history of one individual, well then, me and a number of COFON students and leaders did a COFON kind of ethical protocol project on it, supported by Wenner Gren, about who should have the right to say yes or no, who should be compensated. So communities have a lot of autonomy. So first you have to work with the community in open meetings, discuss your interests, discuss how people will be participating, how they'll be forming questions, what they'll be learning from it, and what they'll be getting in exchange for working with you on the project. And a big part of that, when I found out that I was going to work in this community and have to stay working with people in this community, because that's my research relationship right now, that it was only going to be about Cesario. And we got to look more and more like kind of almost a life history because of how important he is. And I think that came across in the talk. And just learning so much about him, his brilliance, his interesting story, his care for me. I'm just like, this is not just my book or something. And I asked him this summer, Cesario, how would you feel? Well, first I asked people, do you want this to be known about you? I mean, I can create pseudonyms, make up a village, and they're like, no, we want to be credited and known for our input. And Cesario was super interested in being listed as the co-author on the book. I gave that question to him, talked about risks and benefits, and he's all over it. So there's going to be so much text from him also in the book, direct quotes from him. So he really is a co-author. And as I said, I don't get any royalties. The difficult thing, I think, will be to change the royalty structure for Devuno. I've almost gotten $10,000 in royalties. So these aren't, it's not just tiny amounts of money to people who are very materially impoverished. Whether Cesario will get more royalties, than the original agreement was, which was the community to get them all, rather than one individual get half of them, let's say. So we'll see. Steve Casiba, great talk, Mike. Have you looked into V.S. Rojas's work on Nahualismo in southeastern Mexico? No. I wish I was better read, but I'm not. He was largely writing in the 40s. I'm curious, not so much with respect to comparative shamanic violence, but more so in terms of whether and how shamanic violence and indigenous colonization tends to increase among indigenous groups as capitalist land intrusion increases. I think I've gotten lost a little bit here. Let's see, Steve, where'd your question go? Was it still there, Shoko?
Sorry, I accidentally moved it to the unsoured tab. Sorry, that was.
Oh, okay. So I lost it, but obviously you wouldn't have this colonization at all without the oil industry. They are the ones who built the roads. You wouldn't have had it with our government policies of, declaring Cofan territory, tierras baldías, empty lands. So obviously it was totally enabled by the intrusion of capitalist industry. What happened after that, of course, though, I mean, there are many people who moved in or didn't move in. Different communities, Cofan communities had different abilities to secure their land. One community has 150,000 hectares and Devuno has 6,000? Actually, probably less now that they gave some of it away to the Napo. So there are radically different things there. And, like I said, from direct Napo accounts, mainly Patricio's family, we came, we knew the Cofan were here, we took the land anyways. They didn't try to talk to anybody or ask them or create relationships with them. It's just what they said. Hey, this was what we were doing and this is what happened. And the government said it was okay and we needed land. So we came and we took it. That's just the fact of the situation. Anonymous attendee, interesting. I think I already read that. Lumped in as one single entity. Yes, I did go to that one. Not that it really matters. So I think I'm getting messed up. Let's see. So are the new questions still at the bottom? Shoko?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
I think the next question was from an anonymous attendee. How do you think that your lack of belief in shamanism?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's interesting. It's tough as an ethnographer to really honor the perspectives and really take seriously, even ontologically, what people tell you. And I write as if that's the case, and I'm reflexive. You got to be reflexive if you're working with doing any ethnography, but especially with indigenous folks as a white researcher in the United States. I have a strange kind of quasi belief in shamanism. I'm not a full-on believer. But boy, that cure of me after being sick for so long and then immediately after Cesario cured me, I was fine. Coincidence, there's all sorts of theories about why shamanic action works, involving biomedical processes and stuff. And I am afraid of, shamanic attacks. So, I don't know if I could be a full-on believer in this, but I think I have enough understanding and enough of some kind of sense that it's important and powerful to write about it in a true and respectful way. If I had no belief, I would take Cesario up on his offer to teach me. Mike, you want some weapons? I can give him some. And I asked him, will they always be in my body, Cesario, or can I get rid of them if I don't want them? Nope, they'll always be in your body. They'll come right back in if you don't care for them. And if you're not careful, you go to the US and you don't obey the proper prohibitions that can actually damage your body. So, that if I really didn't believe it at all, I would, go for it and say, yeah, Cesario, I'd have to lie to him and say, yeah, I'll obey all the prohibitions in the States, which is impossible. But it's a tough one. Anyways, so yeah, I'm afraid actually for him to give me these weapons. And that obviously displays some kind of belief in what's going on. How does Napo political power play at the national level? Can you talk more about that? Interesting fact that nobody knows. For 24 hours, a Napo Amazonian Quechua person was the president of Ecuador. Part of the triumvirate of national salvation. In 2001, there was a coup against Jamil Maquad, and an Amazonian Quechua leader was part of 3 people who assumed the presidency. And then they gave it to the vice president a day later. So Ecuador is an interesting country. This is where much of the Latin American indigenous movement was born. You have, there's by some estimates, the Ecuadorian populations that's indigenous, it can range from 10% to 40% because of all the Andean indigenous people there. The indigenous movement there was extremely strong through the early 2000s, could shut down the country, could basically almost get presidents kicked out of office. And, there are national level indigenous organizations that are allied with Amazonian indigenous organizations, the most powerful of which are those belonging to the Shuar people of southern Ecuador and the Quechua of central Ecuador. So there is a lot of national power there. Although I was talking to Chris Jared earlier, and he's like, Mike, you can't pretend that these people are like, super powerful in Ecuador. They're dealing with so many problems too. They're not, they're not as they're still highly marginalized in all sorts of ways. And I agree with that. But compared to the Kofan, who've always felt like they were under the thumb of these folks, they felt like they couldn't participate in the national indigenous movement because they were intentionally excluded by the Quechua, to a lesser extent by the Shuar. They felt like, we have no political power or role to play because these people want to keep us in a kind of client position here. This is a long, old animosity going back between the Quechua and the Kofan. Like I said, it's way too deep and pervasive for me to do anything about through workshops or conversations or anything else. Highly recommended Linda Tahuai Smith's work on decolonizing methodologies. I have read it. I need to go back to it though. So thank you very much. In my theory course this week, we're reading a lot of decolonizing work. So it'll be good to have. And Dice de Carvalho, sorry, can you maybe explain a little bit more how you explain your work to the community in an accessible way? Here, thinking about the best strategy to do that. Well, that's a tough one. One thing we have to do in realizing the diversity of indigenous populations, well, first off, there's 2 students who are a member of a Kofan community who speak English and went to Brown who are getting their PhDs in anthropology now. They can have the same kind of conversations you and I can have. And then there's various forms of translation, that go back down to the community level. There are Kofan people from Davuno. I'm president of the Kofan Survival Fund. We got a lot of money to do an education project, getting Kofan students bachelor's and master's degrees in Ecuador. And one of the people getting a master's degree now is from Davuno in intercultural justice and the rights of nature, I think it is. So these could be really highly educated people. And many of them are smarter than me, that's for sure. And, when you're speaking their own language and talking to them, what you're writing about, the basic issues, of course, the theoretical stuff is hardly of interest to anthropologists, let alone indigenous people. But the basic empirical and ethnographic shape of the project or its findings are really easy to communicate, I think. I must say I go back on a semi-annual basis, unless there's some reason that I can't go back, like COVID last year, or when I was in the hospital in 2015, I go back every year. I talk to Kofan people constantly via the internet. Davuno has a cell signal. It's really weak. So I'm constantly in conversation about what I do. And the community had to okay what I wanted to study. I had to explain it to them. What's your research idea? Should you do it? Should you not do it? What should you focus on? And they were fine with it. So it takes a lot of conversation. It takes learning an indigenous language. You can speak to everybody, even the folks who don't speak Spanish or don't speak it well enough. But if you've been going somewhere for 27 years, like I have, it's not that hard to communicate, what your project is about and what your findings are. So that's my current stance on that. It's not something one can do, as a grad student rolling up on day one. But after a lot of, conversation and mutual trust and rapport building, I think it's possible. It's very hard, but it takes a long time, a lot of familiarity, a lot of trust. And I do want to create, I'm not sure in the documentary work I do, and I've worked with Kofan people on documentaries before. I did a land mapping project, and there was a 5-hour film I did with Kofan folks about territory-related oral histories. So we've done it before, but I'm not sure in the Kofan version of the documentary whether they want it to be purely about Kofan shamanic practice to explain the details of how these treasured elders like Cesario cure, what's involved. I mean, some young people are interested in learning about shamanism now. People don't want folks to forget about this, something they're proud of, they want people to know about. I'm not quite sure how much they'll want the animosity with the Napo to figure into that. And that'll involve a lot of serious conversation about risks too. I mean, if this, I'd like to do a Spanish language version of this too, if it starts doing the rounds in Amazonian Ecuador on YouTube or something, and some Napo folks, some Quechua folks hear it, you could have a situation where these conflicts become even more intense. I highly doubt that because they're already so intense. They're already public. It's not hidden knowledge, like I said. But it's something we'll have to talk about, and I take their lead. If they say something should be written about, I think about writing it. If they say no way, off limits, I say no way, off limits. I mean, that's my research position. So we'll see. Is there anything else here, Shoko? I'm not sure. I probably skipped over some.
I think that was all the questions we received through the box, unless anyone has kind of final questions that they wanted to raise. You're welcome to raise your Zoom hand. But I think this has been a really rich and provocative set of questions and conversations. So
I must say there were some really long questions where I hit the first point, but then I look and there's more in the middle, but it's complicated. Right. I'd be happy to, please send me an email with all your thoughts, your concerns, things I should read, whether they're about this topic or about Indigenous scholarship or about similar kinds of ethical issues for anthropologists. Like I said, this is a project that's still in process. This is like pure ethnography with my long-term ethical sensibilities guiding it. I don't know whether it's, to what degree it speaks to current scholarship in the region or outside of it. So any ideas you have, I would appreciate that greatly. So please send it my way.
Great, and we'll continue some of these conversations in the smaller dinner conversation later today. But I think for now, I think we should probably wrap up for now. But thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Cepek, for this really, really rich film and set of reflections. And thank you, everyone on Zoom, for sticking around and all your wonderful questions as well. So I think we'll wrap up the talk itself with this for now, but thank you again.
All right, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks for giving me some of your time. And it was a wonderful experience.